Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the first session of Ask the Doctor with Dr. Jim deMaine. My name is Michael Hebb, and I'm the founder of EOL.community and a project called Death Over Dinner. And we're thrilled that we have Dr. Jim deMaine with us. I'm going to let Jim give a bit of background because he has a very long and illustrious career in medicine. So Jim's going to start by just telling us a little bit about how he got involved in medicine and what he did during his long career, and then we'll talk about end-of-life planning. Jim, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much, Michael, and thanks for the collective for having me. I think the work you're doing in this field, advanced care planning and talking about death is really transformative. And Michael's book and efforts are so useful in advancing the field. My own background, I grew up in the Midwest in Ohio with a family physician father, so kind of naturally rebelled against going into medicine because I thought my dad worked too hard. But eventually, that was my choice, and went off to medical school after graduating from Northwestern to the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine back in the early 60s. And at that time, we weren't really taught about death or dying. In fact, we didn't even mention the word cancer to patients. So it's very paternalistic era in medicine. But I chose internal medicine, went up to New York City for my internship. And then we were all going to get drafted during the Vietnam era. So I chose to go into the public health service and was sent to Afghanistan for 2 years. Um, where my wife and I had met years earlier when I was volunteering over there. But I took care of Peace Corps volunteers for a couple of years, and that was my assignment in the public health service, which was wonderful. Then I came back and did a residency in internal medicine in Wisconsin and got really interested in infectious disease. So came out to Seattle and haven't left since. Ended up running an admitting ward in a tuberculosis hospital here in Seattle. Got very interested in lung disease. And this was in the very early days of intensive care, critical care. But I did see some deaths all along the way and got more and more interested in how we approach death and what really happens to us. And are we really applying the technologies that we want uh, for those people? What are their wishes? What matters the most? So I went to work at Group Health Cooperative in Puget Sound, which is now Kaiser Permanente system, and got very involved in ethics in the early days about how do we make our choices known and how are they respected? And um, worked a lot, of course, in the intensive care unit. And gradually, I can go into that a little bit later. We developed a program for educating patients and families about end of life choices. But that's been pretty much my career. That career ended in retirement, 17 years ago now. And during the latter part of my career and in retirement, I've been teaching and blogging, and then finally writing about death and facing death. And of course, at my age of 82, I'm approaching it more closely every day, as we all are. And it gives me, I think, a little bit more perspective because I spend this period of my life seeing colleagues pass away, friends pass away, attending memorial services, and watching the choices that people make. And my wife and I still have ongoing discussions about what our choices are. So, Michael, that's kind of been my career, and that's kind of where I am now.
There we go. I was muted.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you.
Jim recently wrote a beautiful book called Facing Death by Clyde Hill Publishing. And we'll share the link to that in the chat as well. And we're going to have a different topic that we focus on within end of life planning each week. So there'll be the way that these sessions will be structure, the way that they'll flow, is we'll have the topic of the day that we're focused on. At any point, people can ask questions in the Q&A, and toward the end of the half an hour together, we'll have Jim pick up some of those questions that I'll prompt and get you some answers. But Jim's not here to give medical advice. He is here to share his wisdom about end-of-life planning. And so we'll jump right in. What have you learned, Jim, about advanced care planning and end-of-life planning after this long career? And why is it so challenging for people from your perspective?
Yeah, advanced care planning is something that as a society we still don't do very well. Really only about a third of us have some written known advanced care plan in place. And why that is that we don't think about death much, we don't talk about it much. But you know, over this past year, it's been just a horrible year. And I think everybody's had a family member or friend or somebody they know that has been affected by the COVID epidemic. That has really brought death to our doorstep. And I've been asked, I've had interviews, been asked questions about ventilators, about life-sustaining treatment, when should we withdraw treatment, those kinds of things. So COVID has certainly had an impact on the way we're thinking about this. But advanced, I think we all have a fear of death, which I think is almost innate. It's maybe one of those existential fears that we all have because we only die once. We don't get any practice. I can't tell you any more about death per se than anybody can because I've not been there yet. But it's a great mystery. It's one of those inevitable things. But in essence, we're all in some degree of denial about this. And denial's healthy in a way because we need to get on with our lives. We look toward life ahead, not just morbidly thinking about our own death. But it will happen, and that's where we need to make a plan because now things are set up so that if you fall down at your favorite shopping mall, society values life. And so what are they going to do? A stranger who is trained in CPR can bare your chest, begin chest compressions, apply shocks to your chest, call 911. Society has given permission for this to happen. It would be an assault in any other situation, but the question is, do we always want this done, no matter what our state of health is? So, as we develop an illness or as we age or as we think ahead, we need to kind of begin to have the conversation. And that's what Michael's dinners are about and his wonderful book, Talk About Death Over Dinner. It's a natural place to have these conversations. But nonetheless, it is difficulty. But we need to begin to think about what matters the most for us, and we need to begin to have the conversations. And that's a plural. It's more than one conversation. It occurs over a period of time, and it becomes clearer as you age or as you develop a chronic illness about what your choices might be. But when you think about those choices, you know, there are a lot of technologic options that can be applied. And do you really know what that technology is? And do you really know what the benefits or burdens of that technology is? I mean, when we begin to apply these technologies, usually you as a patient would have no experience with this. Um, what does putting a tube down your throat and putting you on a ventilator really mean? What are your chances of coming off? What symptoms would you experience? And it is okay to refuse the ventilator. So to me, it's a lot like having an operation or procedure done. We need to have informed consent about whether we want the technology applied to us or not. Because medicine, some people have compared it to a conveyor belt of technology. We can always apply more technology. There's always another drug for cancer. But when is it time to let go? And this is Atul Gawande's wonderful book, Being Mortal. It's a whole chapter on letting go. And he actually published a piece in the New Yorker also entitled Letting Go. So when can we let go? So then we really need to make a plan. We call it advanced care planning. And that is a nuanced thing too. And that actually occurs over time in multiple conversations. And there's lots of ways to make that plan, but it doesn't do much good unless you really have that conversation with your loved ones and that you choose an advocate. The advocate is somebody that is empowered to be your power of attorney for healthcare decisions. And we'll talk more about this person in future sessions. But if you're just going to fill out one document and have one conversation, it should be with that person, because at the bedside in the intensive care unit, as I would come in and see somebody critically ill, the person I really need to talk to is your advocate, because they have to speak for you. In fact, in our last 2 weeks of life, only half of us can really participate in that conversation. So your advocate is the one that needs to step up. And we'll talk about that more later. But once you make a plan, then you have to figure out how you make that plan work, because best plans can go awry. You may have filled out all the documents, but are you sure they're going to be found? Are you sure they're going to be adhered to? Where are they? How can they be accessed? Um, do they stop at the emergency room, or will the doctors in the hospital pay attention to those plans? So those are all things where the system can go awry. And we need to understand how the system works, how the medical system works, and how we can align your wishes with with what we as physicians um, would apply for your care. Um, that's what we want to do. We don't want to um, provide care that you don't want, but the default in medicine is still to prolong life. And so unless we are told otherwise, that that's the path that we're led to follow. So I kind of like to tell a story. Is that okay, Michael, at this point?
Yeah, tell us.
Okay, because I tend to think in stories, and there's many. My book is really a book of stories. It's not a how-to manual, although I do have an index in the back that has resources and frequently asked questions. But this story is actually about my neighbor. We were good friends. His name is Pete. Not really, but I'm going to use some subterfuge here to protect privacy. But he was a good guy. We were on some committees together. We chatted a lot. And one day over the backyard fence, he told me that he had prostate cancer. And he talked about his options that he'd discussed. And he decided to go ahead with surgery. And that did not go well. I found out later. He told me that the cancer had spread beyond the prostate, was in the lymph nodes, and later was found to be in his spine. And he had to start on some medication. Initial treatment for that is usually drugs to block testosterone or provide estrogen type therapy. And that made him uncomfortable, but was tolerable. But that really wasn't working. His PSA kept rising. He kept having symptoms. So they switched him over to chemotherapy, which did not go well at all. Um, Unfortunately, during this period of time, nobody was really having conversations with him or the family. He was just on this, what I call the conveyor belt of treatment. And he wound up being very, very weak and very sick from the chemotherapy. So he was admitted to the hospital and placed in an intensive care unit. And he had severe electrolyte disorder. They managed to get him stabilized and sent him back home. But I saw his wife, Peggy, again over the backyard fence and asked how he was doing, if I could visit him. And she said, oh, please do visit him. He's been so weak since he got back from the hospital. He's been in a recliner chair. He can barely get up to get to the bathroom, and he just feels terrible. So I went in, and I saw him, and he was just stretched out in his recliner. He was clammy, pale. I held his hand and just kind of surreptitiously checked his pulse. It was running at about 130, 140. And it looked to me like he was dying. And so I asked Peggy later outside whether any plans had been made if, if he became critical. And she said, well, I won't call 911. He wants to die at home. We're clear about that. And so I guess I'll just let him die at home. And I said, well, who's really helping? He said, well, my kids are somewhat distant, but I think they'll come in. And I said, well, have you completed a post form in case 911 does get called? We can talk about this later, but she said, what's the post form? And I explained. And I said, well, for goodness sakes, how about hospice? And she said, well, nobody's mentioned hospice. And I said, well, get on the phone with your doctor today, please, and insist on hospice. And if they don't respond, call hospice directly, but they need to get out quickly. And she did. And hospice was there the next day. They provided him a hospital bed and all the benefits that hospice can provide, plus support for her. And Pete died peacefully at home within a week after that. And so that story points out the deficiencies in communication, the deficiencies in knowledge, and the problems with advanced care planning. It's different for each of us. Each of us has our own wishes, but fortunately, um, his major wish, he wanted to die at home. He always told me, I want to go out here feet first. And he did, but it could have been a lot smoother than it was. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the story about Pete.
Yeah, not everybody has you as a neighbor who's looking over the back, you know.
I, I was the accidental advocate. And
Yeah.
believe me, in retirement, that I get a call every couple of weeks about a question about advocacy and what should I do. So I think that's a role retired doctors and nurses and medical people can play more actively than they do.
Yeah, and so some of my quick takeaways from what I'm listening to from you are the health proxy or the healthcare agent being probably the most important first step, and it's maybe the easiest thing you can do as a single form. And there are different resources per each state around a healthcare proxy. The National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization has great forums as one example. Here in Seattle, there's Honoring Choices Pacific Northwest. So there's a lot of options, and we have options on EOL as well. But what I also am hearing is you might have an agent, but they may not be informed. They may not understand about hospice. They may not understand about palliative care, and that there could be a much more comfort and grace and assistance, even when things are getting really hard towards the end. So that's the kind of longer path, is making sure that more and more people are educated.
Yeah, I think one thing I like about the Honoring Choices Pacific Northwest forum is that they put what matters most to you kind of choices. If you're in this situation or that situation, is it quality of life? Is it life at all costs, no matter what? Or is it only comfort care? You can put those choices on the form, but it's the same form that the advocate has to sign. So it kind of combines a value statement with the durable power of attorney for healthcare. But I totally agree with you. That is a very, very key first step. It was funny, I was talking about this to University of Washington law students. I've done this a couple of times. I've presented this talk to them. It's called Your Life, Your Choices. And they were debating the case of Nancy Cruzan. It was a young lady who went off the highway, wasn't found in a ravine for quite a period of time, but she was still alive, but in a vegetative state. She didn't require a respirator to breathe, but she had very minimal, if any, neurologic function, and was being kept alive with a feeding tube. And the real question then, was it legal to remove her feeding tube and allow her to die? And it was a big argument with the family who wanted to remove the feeding tube. And the hospital said, no, it's killing her. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's one reason now that we have the ability to follow a patient or family's wishes. But the law students were blogging back and forth about individual rights and, who was right, the hospital or the family. So I asked them, I said, do any of you have an advance directive, or any of you have a will or estate plan? And none of them did. They're all, in quotes, too young. And that's one of the big problems of beginning to think about this while you're healthy and beginning to have the conversations. But certainly by age 60 or 65, people should really begin to approach it seriously, because no matter what, we are to leave this world. Williams Ryan said, I know everybody's going to die, but I believe an exception will be made in my case. And,
Yeah,
I think in a way we're all in denial and kind of think that.
absolutely. Well, and the other thing about establishing a healthcare proxy or healthcare agent is that does spark a conversation between you and that person. And then
Yes.
you're having an end of life conversation, and you can have that in a variety of different ways. Um, Death Over Dinner is one. The Conversation Project, another great resource,
Right.
these end of life conversations, but it really becomes a community conversation. So we've got some interesting, even like straight into the deep end questions.
Okay. That's okay.
One which I'm fascinated to hear your answer to, and we could probably do a whole session on. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you haven't had this experience, but I don't know the name of the person, but it's from VFT Training. Have you had experiences with patients who have undergone a near-death experience or an NDE in your long career?
Um, Personally, I have not, but I've had some very strange experiences. Actually, one nurse in the intensive care unit told me about a drowning incident she personally had as a child. And she was a very good nurse, very good science background, but she had a near-death experience, and very much like Raymond Moody describes in his book, Life After Life. The white light, the sense of warmth, the sense of peace as death seemed to enfold her, only to be pulled back. I have had people that have, I had one fellow who came into my office. He had lost his wife about 6 months previously, and said that they had a favorite restaurant to go to on Sundays, and he would put on his same tweed coat and tie and go sit in the same booth, and he could see her on the other side. He just had a very clear perception, couldn't really talk to her, but they communicated with facial expression and with her eyes. And was very comforting to him. And, you know, there's a lot out there that we really can't explain in terms of that, the near-death experience. Even Alexander book, Proof of Heaven, here's an atheistic neurosurgeon who converts to more religious thinking after having extensive experience while he was in coma with encephalitis. So it's out there. I don't think we can prove an afterlife, but we're certainly getting glimpses that of what it might be like.
Yeah, there's a great show on Netflix right now called Surviving Death, I believe, that
Okay.
looks at some of this phenomenon. And I found every time I put a group of people around the table and I asked them to talk about near-death experience or just some connection to people that have died, you find you give the space and openness for people to share those stories, and they have them.
Yeah.
um, it's there is so much in the realm that we don't talk about, and so much in the realm that we don't feel comfortable talking about. We only have a couple more minutes, and so I'm gonna there's some great, oh, Bob Hoffman is VFT Training. Thank you, Bob, for these great questions.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to come back next week, Bob, for a couple of them, because we're not gonna be able to get to all of them. But there is obviously some controversy around advanced care directives being found, being effective, being applied. We only have 2 more minutes left, but it's for those people who are only with us this week, and don't come back for whatever reason because of time and schedule, where we will be delving into this more deeply. What is your recommendation for people when it comes to, okay, I've done my advanced care plan, or where to do your advanced care plan, how to make sure that the likelihood of it being honored and respected is high?
Yeah. Well, certainly signing the durable power of attorney for your advocate can be done over the dining room table. You have to have witnesses, and the state requirement for uh, notarization varies from state to state. I think certainly people need to go into their medical provider, and now Medicare will allow that to be a billed visit. Now that we've gotten beyond death panels, we can actually go in and review that. Once you have your directives completed, certainly keep a copy in your files. Let everybody know where they are. Uh, Certainly your physician's office needs to have copies, and your advocate. And keep a list of anybody that have copies, because you're going to be updating these periodically. And the last thing you want is to have confusion at the end. Now, if you're on hospice and you have a do not resuscitate order, that needs to be immediately visible, usually at the foot of the bed or door, sometimes the refrigerator. In retirement communities, I live at Skyline in downtown Seattle. For our building, we have what we call a pulse folder. We would put our advanced directive, our pulse form if we have one, our list of medications, all in one folder that is attached with Velcro, that is removable when 911 is called and can go with you on a gurney to an emergency room. Electronic medical records technology will help to advance where we can find these forms. In Oregon, they have a registry statewide for the pulse forms. We have some electronic sharing now between emergency rooms, but it can be a little bit of a hassle to find, even with electronic medical records, because they can be stored in different systems. So having them uh, knowing where they're available, knowing who has copies, and the sicker you are, the more available they need to be, for sure.
Great. Well, and so those of you who answer or ask questions that we didn't get to this week, I've just made copies of them so that we can get to them next week. And so we're with Jim every Tuesday, and we're going to take a main topic, like I said, and then we're going to answer questions with Jim. So, Jim, thank you so much for
Okay.
being with us.
I look forward to the questions. They're always interesting, and I don't know the answer to everything, but I'll certainly give you my opinions.
Terrific. Well, a huge thanks to all of our partners. There are so many. I'm not going to go through the whole list right now, but they're on the event page. Folks like CTAC and Aegis Living and Transforming Age and Votive Health. So many remarkable people that are sharing about this weekly series. And we'll be back next week with Jim. In the meantime, buy his book, Facing Death. And we'll see you soon. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.